A heavy mahogany table, expensive paintings hanging on the walls, and a perfectly maintained garden stretching outside the window. Everything in that space, which should have been the place where I grew up, came to feel as cold as a courtroom, as if it were appraising my very existence. The lawyer finished reading the will of my grandfather, David Bennett. The contents were extremely simple. All assets shall be divided equally among the legal heirs. Silence fell. However, that silence was nothing more than the ominous stillness before a storm. The one who broke it was my younger brother, Kevin. He opened his mouth with a twisted smile full of confidence, a look I had never seen on him before. Wait a minute. I believe we need to strictly define legal heirs. His eyes were locked onto me. In them was a clear reflection of the contempt that must have been hidden for many years. And then he pronounced his sentence. I'm sorry, Ashley, but you cannot be considered an heir to this estate. Because, he continued his words with a voice overflowing with cruel delight, you're not really Dad's child. You have always been a fake. Fake, the word echoed inside my head. As I stood frozen, unable to grasp its full meaning, my father gave a heavy cough and confirmed the statement. Kevin is right, Ashley. You are nothing more than an outsider in this family. My mother pressed a Dior handkerchief to her eyes as if playing the role of a tragic heroine. Yet I knew her trembling shoulders were not from sorrow, but from barely contained excitement. Outsider. Fake? Those words became the trigger, and in my mind, 28 years of a false family history came rushing back like a revolving lantern. Looking back, it had always been like this. I vividly remembered the time when I decided to enter law school. The moment I declared my decision to the family in the living room, my father slammed the newspaper he had been reading down onto the table and shouted at me. A lawyer? A woman being arrogant? That money should be used for Kevin, the rightful heir who will inherit this house one day. Do you really think that a cold-hearted person like you could ever move people's hearts? After finishing college, you should either marry quickly or help with Kevin's work. My mother also said coldly, why can't you make the calm choice of supporting Kevin? You are always stirring up trouble. It is as if you were born only to disrupt the harmony of this family. To them, the only child deserving of any inheritance for a better future was only Kevin. I was nothing more than someone who would receive the scraps. At that time, I simply thought I was being treated coldly because I was a woman and because I had no intention of inheriting the family business. I never dreamed that they harbored an unshakable suspicion toward my very existence. But perhaps my grandfather had overheard that conversation somewhere. Later, he called me into his study. In that calming space, where the smell of leather sofas, the scent of old books, and the faint smoke from the fireplace were all mixed together, he spoke to me. That is exactly what makes you my granddaughter. Become the greatest lawyer. Do not listen to what they say. Your weapon is your reason, which may seem cold, and your unwavering sense of justice. That will become the strongest shield to protect the weak. And then he added, this is an investment. It is my investment in you that one day you will create a value far greater than anything money could buy, as he handed me a check for my tuition with a mischievous smile. I can still remember the smell of that paper and the feel of the ink. When my grandfather passed away, I lost my shield. They never doubted that I was just a powerless daughter who would do nothing but cry herself to sleep. On the day I graduated law school at the top of my class, while other families carried bouquets to celebrate their graduates, I stood alone in my gown. That night, when I called home, my father said, oh, I see. More importantly, I bought Kevin a new car to celebrate his graduation. Since you're going to become a lawyer, you should contribute some money. Even at the brightest moment of my life, to them, I was nothing more than a source of money to be exploited for my younger brother. The indifference directed at me, and the excessive love directed at my brother. That contrast gnawed away at my heart slowly but surely. From my revolving lantern-like memories, I was pulled back to reality. Yes, I had been an outsider all along. I had only been pretending not to notice. The moment the papers for renunciation of inheritance were thrown at me and the heavy doors of the mansion were closed, something inside my heart burst quietly, yet undeniably. It was not sorrow. It was not despair. It was a burning flame of anger strong enough to burn everything to ashes. My name is Ashley Bennett. I am a lawyer who wins justice for my clients on the battlefield called the courtroom. Once, my father mocked me when I aimed for law school, saying, "Do you really think that a cold-hearted person like you could ever move people's hearts?" That remark may have remained lodged in my heart like a thorn. After graduation, I first chose the path of becoming an FBI agent, a world ruled only by facts and evidence. At that time, I believed the only correct path was not to rely on people's hearts, but to wield unwavering facts as weapons to enforce justice. However, in fighting against the logic of the organization and enormous evils, the faces of the powerless I could not save before my eyes taught me my true mission: to listen to the voiceless voices of each individual and to become their shield. That is why I became a lawyer. Ironically, the client I must save now is myself. How amusing. Struck by the rain, I couldn't help but smile. The flowing rainwater felt as though it were washing away the sediment of my heart. This family charade is over. From here on, my counterattack begins. I took out my smartphone and contacted the investigative professional I trusted most, Emily, a former intelligence officer. "Emily, it's me." "Yes, I've found the best client." "Myself." On the other end of the line, I sensed Emily catch her breath. "Are you serious, Ashley? Facing your own family will be far more mentally grueling than pursuing any heinous criminal. Will you be all right?" Her concern slightly eased the stiffness in my heart. "I'll be fine." "That's exactly why I need you, Emily. No sentiments. I only want the facts. The targets are 3 people. My family. Within legal boundaries, expose everything about them to the light of day. The flow of money, past relationships, hidden secrets. Everything down to the bone. All right. I will cooperate with you not as your lawyer, but as your friend. Be prepared. The truth can sometimes become the cruelest of blades. The courtroom would become the execution ground. One by one, I would expose the crimes they had committed under the light of the law. This was not revenge. It was simply the execution of justice. The perfect execution of justice, by me and for me, has begun. My apartment room was transformed into my command center. On the walls, I posted charts of relationships connected to the case and timelines of the legal procedures I would take. The pure white walls became canvases to organize my thoughts. Photos of my father, mother, and Kevin. Next to them, I wrote down keywords that could become their weaknesses: illegal loans, adultery, fraud. Lines drawn in red pen spread across the wall like blood vessels. First, I'll dive straight into the enemy's pocket. I announced the first stage of the plan during a video call with Emily. Her office, as always, was cluttered yet systematically organized, the workplace of a true professional. I will file motions for the disclosure of all financial records and bank transaction histories of my father's company. They will resist, but the court will inevitably grant it. Their lawyers will likely focus solely on stalling for time. During that time, your job is to close in from the outside. On the monitor, Emily took a sip of coffee and nodded. "Sure. I'll shake things up from the outside. Kevin's circle, his past relationships. No, I'll investigate even your mother's social connections thoroughly. I'll reach out to informants as well. If there's even a cent of money, they'll dig up stories no matter how old they may be. I'm especially curious about your father's former business partner, Daniel Scott. There must be something behind his disappearance. The public records say he vanished almost like a fugitive after a business failure, but there are far too many inconsistencies. Sentiments were meaningless. Only a cold legal strategy mattered. As expected, their lawyers resisted with every legal term they could muster, saying, "This is an unreasonable demand," and "This is an invasion of privacy." But I calmly refuted them before the judge. Your Honor, since I, the plaintiff, am claiming that my inheritance rights were unjustly violated by the defendants, it is essential to scrutinize their financial conditions, particularly the flow of money suspected to be connected to the estate, in order to reveal the truth of this case. Their reliance on privacy is nothing more than an attempt to conceal the truth. My argument was fully accepted, and a few days later, dozens of boxes of documents were delivered to my office. From that day on, I drowned myself in a sea of documents, sacrificing even my sleep. The analytical skills I had cultivated as a former FBI agent were put to their maximum use. In the midnight office, with documents plastered across the walls and countless sticky notes, I fueled myself only with coffee as I pulled out one irregular flow of money after another from endless columns of numbers. It was like searching for a single diamond grain within a mountain of sand, an overwhelming task. Balance sheets, income statements, cash flow statements. Behind what appeared to be flawless records was a web of clever disguises. I even uncovered the habits of the accountant my father had hired and dismantled the tricks hidden within the numbers. And at dawn, 72 hours after the investigation began, I finally found it. There were records showing that just 3 days after the inheritance meeting, the estate had been illegally pledged as collateral for a massive loan executed to my father's company. Most of the funds were funneled through shell companies established in tax havens and ultimately ended up in Kevin's personal account. Checkmate, I murmured coldly, filing the documents into a folder labeled fraud. At that moment, an urgent message came in from Emily. Ashley, I found something interesting. That sports car Kevin drives, there's something wrong with the source of its purchase funds. No such large sum was ever moved from his account. I analyzed the data she sent me and was shocked. The purchase had been made using my subcard, the emergency card I had created during an overseas assignment, which I had lost 6 months ago and given up on as gone, a card I had barely used. He had stolen it, forged a change of address request, and had the statements sent directly to him, a clever trick to keep me from noticing. With my demanding FBI assignments, especially extended overseas deployments, I had no time to carefully check the usage of that card, and I had completely put its existence out of my mind. Upon checking the statements, I saw that not only the sports car but luxury watches, branded goods, and even the expenses of nightly parties had all been paid with my card. This was credit card fraud, an undeniable serious crime. This was not something that could be resolved by merely cutting ties. I clutched the receiver tightly, hesitating for a moment. To accuse my own family as criminals with my own hands. Do I truly have the resolve to cross that line? What flashed in my mind was the face of my brother who had mocked me as a fake, and the image of my family, who had always used my efforts as their stepping stone. While they called my tuition wasted money, behind the scenes they were stealing my funds and squandering them. My hesitation vanished in an instant. I quietly dialed the complaint desk of the federal prosecutor's office. After giving the name of the prosecutor in charge, I conveyed my intention to file charges calmly, yet firmly. Meanwhile, Emily had tracked down the whereabouts of my father's former best friend, Daniel Scott, and successfully made contact. He was living quietly in the suburbs of California, under a new name, running a small construction company. I immediately flew there. I needed to meet him in person and speak directly. At a seaside cafe, I sat across from him. He looked even more worn down than he had on the screen. My name is Ashley Bennett. The moment I introduced myself, his shoulders shook violently. I cut straight to the point. The past with my mother, and the possibility that Kevin might be his son. He lifted a trembling hand to his coffee cup and finally opened his heavy mouth. I ran away. From her, and from the future of the child who was to be born. Jason was my best friend. But I betrayed him. I fell in love with Melissa. When she told me she was pregnant, I should have confessed everything. But she didn't want that. She told me to disappear to protect her family. I did as she wished. I thought that was my atonement to them. How foolish I was. His voice trembled with 28 years of regret. Sometimes I wonder, if back then I had confessed everything honestly, Could there have been another future? The child who might be my son, what kind of man has he grown into now? I placed a photo in front of him. It was a picture of Kevin, grinning arrogantly beside his sports car. Daniel stared at the photo as if trying to burn it into his eyes, and then a single tear fell from them. He looks very much like me. That single remark was a cry from the depths of his soul. If I truly have a son, then at the very least allow me to testify for him, so that he will not have to continue living within lies. That will be my only atonement. He agreed to DNA testing and testifying in court. Our cooperation was thus established. My mother's infidelity. My father's deception. Kevin's crimes. All the evidence was steadily assembled under proper legal procedures. Emily, all the evidence has been gathered. I returned to my office and looked up at the relationship chart on the wall. With a voice filled with the calm of a certain victory, I told her, it is time to deliver judgment on them in both civil and criminal courts. The charade performed by this false family was already over. The civil courtroom was my stage alone. As a lawyer, I presented the evidence calmly yet without any mercy. First, the evidence concerning the fraudulent loans of my father's company. In front of the money flow projected on the screen, the opposing counsel desperately attempted to object. He seemed to have known my father for many years, and traces of panic appeared on his face. This falls within the scope of legitimate business judgment. It was nothing more than strategic financing for the future of the company. However, one of my defense team, Carter, a former federal prosecutor, cut him off coldly. Then why was this so-called business judgment executed only 3 days after the inheritance meeting, with most of the funds funneled through non-existent shell companies and tax havens, and ultimately transferred into the personal account of your client's son, Mr. Kevin? This is not business judgment. It is a calculated embezzlement, a fraud. Would you care to explain? When Carter submitted the sworn affidavit of the bank officer who had carried out the loan, the courtroom fell silent. It recorded in vivid detail that my father had persuaded the officer by saying, "The inheritance is guaranteed. This is only a formality." My father, beads of sweat forming on his forehead, could only mutter weakly, "I never said that." Next came the medical records proving that my father had known the truth about my birth 15 years ago and concealed it. My father tried to play ignorant. I don't remember. It was 15 years ago. How could I recall the results of some trivial examination? But I summoned Dr. Mitchell, the physician in charge at that time, as a witness. The elderly doctor with white hair took the witness stand and began to speak slowly, yet with a clear tone. Mr. Bennett did indeed request me. He said, "Please never tell my wife or any other family members about this." Instead of feeling relieved, he was terribly agitated as if he had learned a truth he was never supposed to know. His expression was something I can never forget. I felt there must have been complicated circumstances within the household and recommended counseling, but he strongly refused. Dr. Mitchell's testimony completely shattered my father's lies. I could hear the relatives in the gallery beginning to whisper among themselves. And then, the climax. Right after my mother pleaded tearfully, "I have never once betrayed my husband as a faithful wife," I summoned Daniel Scott himself as a witness. When the courtroom doors opened and Daniel appeared, my mother let out a short shriek. Ah! She froze on the spot as though she had seen a ghost. From his lips, the secrets of 28 years poured out, quietly yet in detail. The clandestine dinners, the weekend trips, and the night she told him she was pregnant. I may still have loved her even then. That is why I stepped aside. But it was a mistake. My weakness in turning away from the truth has hurt many people, especially the child who grew up knowing nothing, who may have been my son. Daniel's confession resounded heavily throughout the courtroom. My mother screamed hysterically, "Lies. All lies." I don't know this man, but the screen displayed numerous photos of the two of them in their youth, intimately close, rendering her words meaningless. And finally, the DNA test proved with 99.9% certainty the parent-child relationship between him and Kevin. My father, crushed by the triple blow of betrayal by his lifelong friend, betrayal by his wife, and the truth that the son he believed in was not his own, collapsed completely. My mother broke down in tears as all her lies were exposed to the light of day. And Kevin stood frozen in shock, faced with the truth that he had been the outsider all along, and with the presence of a stranger claiming to be his real father. My complete victory in the inheritance case was clear to everyone. However, the true judgment came afterward. Immediately after the civil trial concluded, waiting at the courtroom exit were plainclothes federal agents. They were the investigators of the credit card fraud case I had reported months earlier. Kevin Bennett, you are under arrest on charges of credit card fraud. Two strong investigators seized both his arms and snapped handcuffs onto him. This is some kind of mistake. Let me go. I didn't do anything. He struggled desperately, but the investigator stated coldly, you illegally used a credit card in the name of Ashley Bennett, causing damages exceeding $100,000. All the physical evidence has been secured. Mom. Dad. Help me. His screams were in vain as he was shoved into the back seat of the patrol car. Then one of the investigators turned to my father. Jason Bennett. We ask that you accompany us on suspicion of involvement in your son's crimes and fraud related to the illegal loans. Having lost everything and standing on the brink of despair, my father and mother no longer had the strength to resist and went away with the investigators. I simply watched that scene in silence. It was a legal and utterly rightful retribution for the way they had treated me. They had tried to exclude me under the shield of blood ties, but in the end, they were judged by the lies within their own bloodline and by the absolute justice of the law. The verdict was my complete victory. My father and Kevin were sentenced to prison, my father to 5 years and Kevin to 3, both to be served in federal prison. My mother received a guilty verdict with a suspended sentence, placed under supervised probation. The wealth and reputation they had built all vanished like foam. As the sole lawful heir, I inherited my grandfather's $5 million and the mansion where they had lived. On the night the trial ended, I stood alone in the mansion's vast living room. The place where family gatherings should once have existed was eerily silent. The walls still displayed their photographs. The images of a smiling, false family. I took each one down from the wall and stacked them before the fireplace. Christmas pictures, Kevin's graduation pictures, my parents' wedding anniversary photos. In every one, my figure was either pushed into the corner or missing entirely. A perfect victory. A perfect revenge. Yet standing before that pile of photographs, what filled my heart was not exhilaration, but a deep and quiet emptiness. I lit the fire in silence. The flames distorted their smiles and eventually turned them to ash. Even after revenge had been achieved, the love of 28 lost years would never return. Nor would the memories of loneliness etched into this house ever disappear. That night, for the first time, I cried out loud. It was a cry from the soul, meant for no one to hear. Seasons turned, and half a year had passed since that scorching summer day. As the city changed into its winter attire, I used my grandfather's inheritance to establish the Bennett Justice Foundation in his name. It was an organization dedicated to legally supporting children from disadvantaged families and people suffering under unjust power. It was my way of sublimating my past and connecting it to the future. At the foundation's inauguration party, I gave a speech. Before many gathered supporters and lawyers, I began to speak quietly. Today, I stand here thanks to one great man. My grandfather, David Bennett. He left me not only wealth, but something far more precious. 2 teachings. Do not avert your eyes from the truth, and uphold your own justice. In this world, there are people crying out silently for help. Even within the smallest unit of society, family, truth can be twisted by power. I was once the one suffering from that. That is why, now, I wish to be on the side that shines light upon it. Justice is not only about punishing evil. It should also be the light that guides those who have erred to rise again. I hope this foundation will become such a light for someone. It was my heartfelt voice directed toward my grandfather in heaven and toward those who, somewhere, were atoning for their sins. The seasons turned again, and I threw myself into the work of the Bennett Justice Foundation. On a freezing day close to Thanksgiving, while serving food at a homeless shelter supported by the foundation, I noticed a woman quietly peeling potatoes at the edge of the volunteer line. She wore no glamorous dress or jewels, just plain, modest clothes. It was my mother. With red, roughened fingers, she focused on her task, looking nothing like the vain woman I had once known. I did not speak to her. I only watched her back in silence. Hatred, pity, and nameless emotions swirled within me. When I returned to my station, a young girl received a bowl of soup and smiled brightly as she said, "Thank you." In the warmth of those words I had once so desperately longed for, a small part of my frozen heart seemed to begin to melt. More time passed, and my father and Kevin finished serving their sentences. I had asked Emily to conduct follow-up investigations on them. Not out of revenge, but because I needed to confirm for myself whether my battle had truly ended. According to the report, my father had left his hometown and was working in a small town as an auto mechanic. In the photo of him in oil-stained overalls, the arrogance of the past was gone, replaced by a calm and earnest expression. Perhaps, for the first time, he had discovered the joy of being useful to someone through his own hands. Kevin, on the other hand, had been rejected by his biological father, Daniel, and after living a reckless life, had started a small handyman service. The report included a photo of him scratching his head awkwardly as an elderly woman at a nursing home handed him a can of coffee. That expression was not the face of the younger brother I once knew. Blood ties would never connect us again. And yet, under the same sky, each of us was facing our own mistakes and trying to rebuild our lives in our own way. Perhaps that, too, was another form of family. Closing the report quietly, I turned my gaze to the window. The mansion where I had once lived had been transformed into a shelter for children bearing wounds in their hearts. From the garden, I could hear the bright laughter of children. My true life is beginning here. And perhaps, in some way, the same is true for them as well. The long, arduous path to redemption had quietly begun.